The grocery store was supposed to take 20 minutes. That was the plan anyway. Marcus had written the list on his phone, organized by aisle, timed it perfectly around nap schedules and the triplets' collective patience, which on a good day lasted approximately 11 minutes, before everything descended into beautiful, exhausting chaos. Today was not a good day. Today, Amara had already knocked a pyramid of soup cans into the next aisle. Elijah had asked 47 times if they could get the cereal with the cartoon tiger. And little Zoe, his quietest one, his observer, had gone unusually still in the cart, her dark eyes fixed on something across the store with an intensity that made Marcus nervous. He'd been a single dad for 2 years. He knew that look. That look meant something was about to happen. "Zoe, baby, don't—" But she was already pointing. Across the frozen food section, standing in front of the glass doors with a basket over one arm, was a woman in a red coat. Not a bright red, not an attention-grabbing red, but a deep, quiet crimson, like something worn on purpose, like armor or a signal. She was maybe mid-30s, with natural hair pulled up under a knit cap, and she was completely, utterly alone in the way that people sometimes are in public. Spaces, present but sealed off, moving through the world in her own frequency. "Pretty," Zoe announced loudly. Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, Amara and Elijah had both turned to stare, because triplets, in his experience, operated as a single organism when it came to curiosity. The woman in the red coat glanced over. She had the kind of face that seemed practiced at neutrality, not cold, but careful. She gave a small, polite smile and looked away. Marcus grabbed a box of pasta. He didn't need just to have something to do with his hands. It was Elijah who crossed the line first, because of course it was. Elijah, who had inherited his mother's complete inability to recognize social boundaries, who once walked up to a man at the park and asked why his head was shiny. Elijah slipped out from where Marcus's hand rested on the cart and trotted 4 steps toward the woman in red before Marcus could react. "Hi," Elijah said. "My dad thinks you're pretty too." Marcus felt the specific kind of death that only parents of small children can understand, not physical, but spiritual, a complete dissolution of the self. "Elijah." His voice came out strained. "Come back here, please." But the woman had crouched down to Elijah's level, and something shifted in her expression. The careful neutrality cracking open, just slightly like light coming through a door that wasn't fully closed. She looked at Elijah with a warmth so genuine it almost hurt to witness. Then she did something Marcus didn't expect. She brought her hands up and began to move them, graceful, deliberate, unhurried, in sign language. Elijah watched with his mouth open, utterly transfixed. Marcus stepped forward, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. "I'm so sorry about him, He stopped. He looked at her hands, still moving, and understood. He didn't know sign language, not really. Not more than the alphabet and the word for help, that he'd looked up once after a scare with Zoe at the playground. But he understood enough to realize she was communicating directly with his son, patiently, fully, as though Elijah was exactly the right person to be talking to. Elijah looked back at his father with enormous eyes. "Dad," he whispered, reverent as if he'd just seen a magic trick. "She's talking with her hands." The woman reached into her basket and produced a small notepad and a pen, the kind of person who carried both, prepared, and wrote quickly, then turned it toward Marcus. "Hi, I'm Dani. I'm deaf. Your son has excellent manners for someone who just told a stranger. His dad thinks she's pretty." There was a smiley face at the end of it, an actual hand-drawn smiley face. Marcus laughed before he could stop himself. A real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere unguarded. He took the pen she offered and wrote back, "I'm so sorry. I'm Marcus. These are Elijah, Amara, and Zoe. I have no idea what I'm doing." She read it and her smile widened. She wrote, "You're doing fine. They're beautiful." Zoe, who had been watching from the cart with enormous seriousness, suddenly held out her arms toward Dani with the complete confidence of a child who has never once been rejected. Marcus started to intervene, but Dani was already looking at Zoe with an expression of such gentle delight that he went still. This was the moment that froze him. Not the sign language, not the notepad, not even the warmth she'd shown his ridiculous, wonderful son. It was the way she looked at Zoe. Like his daughter was not a burden or an inconvenience, or a stranger's child in a grocery store, but something genuinely worth seeing, worth stopping for. He hadn't seen anyone look at his kids that way in a long time, not since Claire. He pushed the thought down, the way he'd learned to, the way single parents learn to manage. Grief on a schedule, between school, drop-off and dinner, never in the grocery store, never in public, never where the kids could see the weight of it on his face. Dani wrote something else and showed him. Do they know any sign language? Marcus shook his head and wrote, No. Should I teach them? She seemed to think about this genuinely, tilting her head, and then wrote, It would be a gift, for them and for anyone they ever meet who needs it. Something about that sentence, the way it reframed it not as learning a skill, but as acquiring the capacity to give something, landed in Marcus's chest and stayed there. Amara, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, can she teach us something right now? Marcus looked at Dani apologetically, but she had already seen, had already read, Amara's expression with the attentiveness of someone who had spent a lifetime reading the world. Without sound, and she nodded. She held up one hand and made a simple gesture, fingers together, moving away from the chin. Then she pointed to herself. She's saying thank you, Marcus guessed, uncertain. Dani shook her head gently and wrote, That's thank you. I was saying it to you, for not pulling them away. He read it twice, for not pulling them away. The phrase settled into him like something he hadn't known he needed to hear. How many times had he seen parents do exactly that? Yank their kids back from anything unfamiliar, anything different, anyone who existed outside the narrow lane of what was expected. How many times had he been the person who got yanked away from, back when his older sister was born with a condition that made strangers uncomfortable, back when he was 7 years old, and learned for the first time that some people's instinct toward difference was to create distance. He hadn't yanked his kids away. He hadn't even thought to. Maybe Claire had given him that, or maybe it was the triplets themselves, who had come into the world together, a small, complete society of their own, and had never learned to see difference as a reason for distance. All three of them were now attempting to copy the sign Dani had shown them, their small hands working seriously. Zoe's version more of a general waving motion, Elijah's surprisingly precise. Amara's accompanied by intense, personal commentary about whether she was doing it right. Dani watched them with an expression that Marcus couldn't fully name. It was joy, yes, but underneath it something quieter, something that looked, and he might have been wrong, he was reading a stranger's face in a grocery store, like relief, like she had been sealed off and something had just briefly let air in. He wrote, Are you from around here? She wrote, Just moved here. 3 weeks ago. Don't know many people yet. He wrote before he could second-guess it. We come here every Saturday. The kids are better in the morning before they've had time to cause too much damage. She laughed, a real one, slightly surprised. The kind of laugh that people make when they're not used to laughing unexpectedly. She wrote, Is that an invitation? He looked at his 3 children, who were now attempting to teach each other the sign they'd just learned, conducting their own chaotic little class in the middle of the frozen foods aisle. He looked back at Dani, at the red coat and the notepad and the careful warmth she hadn't had to extend to any of them and had extended anyway. He wrote, Yes, if you want it to be. She looked at it for a moment. Then she wrote one word, Okay. They parted ways near the checkout line. Dani with her small basket, Marcus with his cart full of children and cereal and the pasta box he'd grabbed for no reason and forgotten to put back. Elijah waved goodbye with the sign they'd learned, or something in its approximate vicinity. Dani signed something back, slow and clear enough that even Marcus could follow it. See you next Saturday. In the car, buckling 3 sets of seatbelts in the particular order that prevented territorial disputes, Amara asked, Daddy, is she going to be our friend? Marcus checked the mirror. 3 sets of eyes waiting. "I think," he said carefully, "she might be." "Good," Zoe said, with the finality of someone who had decided this weeks ago, back when she first spotted a woman in red across the frozen foods aisle and known, the way children sometimes know things before the rest of us catch up, that stopping was worth it. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot into the grey February morning, and for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, the weight on his chest felt slightly, genuinely bearably lighter. Not gone, not fixed, just lighter. Sometimes that's the whole miracle. Someone crouches down to your child's level in a grocery store. Someone carries a notepad. Someone chooses, quietly and without fanfare, not to seal themselves off, or lets you be the reason they don't. Sometimes kindness doesn't announce itself. It just stands in a red coat by the frozen foods, waiting to see if anyone will stop. His kids had stopped. They always did. He was beginning to think that was the best thing he'd ever done. Not the midnight feedings or the school runs or the careful management of 3 individual hearts, but simply this, raising children who knew how to stop